let's talk about mental health! How's everybody feeling today? Yay! I love that we're looking pictures out of ourselves in case we forget. So let's just go down the line and introduce ourselves. My name is Michael Buckley. I've been making videos for 10 years on YouTube. I am the moderator of this panel, so I will let the wonderful panelists introduce themselves and say their name and what they do, even though you know them already. Go ahead.
Hi everybody, my name is Hart, and I've been making videos for about 5 years, and Rose recently published a book called Buffering, which I really was happy about. Thank you.
Which has mental health connotations in the title.
Yeah, Buffering, The Unshared Tales of a Life Fully Loaded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Get it in bookstores or on Amazon, down there.
Wait a squeeze in that subtitle. Oh God.
Who are you? What's your bag?
I'm a writer and YouTuber, and a person with a mental illness, I guess. That's why I'm here.
Hi, I'm Rosianna Halse Rojas. I've been making videos on YouTube for like 11 years or so, and I work with this guy.
Hello, I am T. Michael Martin, but you can call me Mike. I am a sometimes YouTuber. I help create How to Adult, and I also write young adult novels, and also have mental illness, which is also why I'm here.
Well, let's get right into it, and shout out to our wonderful interpreter. I love you over there! Yay! So in terms of mental illness, let's just start. And who in the crowd who identifies as having a mental illness, please raise. Okay, many of you.
Yeah.
Who's diagnosed with mental illness, like diagnosed with mental illness? Okay, got a gauge of the room. Michael, since you said it, and you wrote me an email about tell everybody about your mental illness and what you go through.
Oh, sure.
Everyone's a comedian. Do you want a microphone?
I have 3 diagnoses. I have major depressive disorder, I have a generalized anxiety disorder, and I have seasonal affective disorder. So right now is like a bad time of year for me personally. I'm actually, I'm up here, I'm doing fine. I'm feeling really great this weekend, but I am in the midst of a major depressive episode that has been kind of challenging. Joke at the end of it.
So what is your depression like for you? Like how long does it last? What does it feel like?
For me, it's like the least fun I've ever had without crying.
Oh.
But that's not really true because there's crying. So, for me, it manifests itself as kind of a low-level ambient despair, just kind of feeling like Eeyore about everything. And then it just depending on stress levels or sleep levels or different things that I really can't control sometimes, it spikes into a major depressive episode, which is about as fun as it sounds. That's kind of what it is for me.
John, did you want to chime in about something?
Oh, it's just so hard to talk about it when you're in the middle of it. It's like a form of torture to try to describe those experiences when they're happening, because the narrative around any illness that we're used to is this was a hurdle that I jumped over, or a challenge that I overcame, and that of course isn't what it's like for a lot of people who are sick. It's more that sometimes I'm better and sometimes I'm worse, and when you're not well, it's very difficult to construct the narrative. That's why I liked when you said it, something joke at the end, because the arc of the narrative is supposed to be and then but right now it's really well managed, but I'm doing better, but I figured this out. And sometimes you haven't, but you will. But right now, sometimes you haven't.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is particularly hard about talking about mental illness online, is because you want to be able to tell the story and then say, and then I got better, or have something. You want to be hopeful. You don't want to say, well, this is really hard all the time. But sometimes that's what needs to be said, because that's more, that's more accurate. And by perpetuating the idea that you are always cured of something, you're in fact just making other people feel bad sometimes when they're still struggling with it. So for me, it's been very helpful to listen to people who talk about managing it rather than necessarily curing it. I think the language you use is really important there.
Yeah, that's the problem with using the word like illness, right? Because an illness you recover from, and I also have major depressive disorder. And when I first heard that the actual term was major depressive disorder, I was like, oh. And then my therapist was like, no, it's depression. I was like, oh. Oh my god. But I always like to think of it in terms of color, and this is the way I've used it to explain it to the people around me. Because a major part of managing mental illness is the way we communicate about it to the people who are directly affected, meaning like our loved ones, our intimates, our friends, our family. And to be able to say, things are starting to turn a little sepia, is what I say. And then when I'm in the midst of my episode, everything's black and white. So you can hand me like a sunflower, and you're like, you love sunflowers! But I'm like, yeah, it's in black and white, you know? It's just like, you forget that color exists. And then as you're kind of coming out of your I call it a downswing, into an upswing, it's kind of like the tints and the hues begin to lighten and brighten, and then one day I wake up and I'm like, oh, the sky is blue.
Right. One of the challenges of it is like when you're in that black and white world, a lot of times you are, or at least in my experience, like your brain is also telling you like, this is it.
Colors never existed.
This is forever. This was, what you remember as being well never was fake, and this is your forever now.
Yeah.
And that's just not true, and it's almost impossible to tell yourself on a minute-by-minute basis that it's not true, but it's really, really critical. And I think for me, the tools of cognitive behavioral therapy that are most useful is that tool where if I can talk to myself in a way that's kind and generous and says like, look, I don't want to minimize how bad this is because it's very bad, but it is not forever. Like this is only right now, and it's the foreverness of it that I find really like horror movie level terrifying.
Yeah. Do you guys do CBT?
Yeah.
So cognitive behavioral therapy is like, hey, yeah, handful of claps. Look it up. It's great. It's a form of therapy that it has like patterns and structures, and it's a really kind of great way of talking with your mind. I would think there's about 10 cognitive distortions. It's fascinating to look up, but you realize that what you're doing participates in them. Like I catastrophize a lot,
yeah. Yes.
And then it's just like something happens, and every part of my nervous system, in my somatic responses are just like, and I'm like, oh no. It's like, oh wait, the world's not actually ending. It's ending in my head, but it's not actually ending. And so you learn tools to kind of pull yourself out of those moments.
One thing I would say as well is that different types of therapy, different types of treatment, everything will be different throughout your life, probably. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but that's been my experience. There have been times that CBT has been so effective. It has been like the thing keeping me going, and a combination of other things too. But there have been other times that it's not been as effective, and my therapists have tried other forms, or like I've stopped liking a therapist and moved to another one. So there is that sense again of managing it and things changing. That sometimes I think when you've been doing something and it's been working, and then it kind of stops working, you think, oh well, it's because I'm so broken and unfixable, and that can lead to catastrophizing in and of itself. So just that, trying to find ways to let yourself zoom out from that and say, okay, I'm just going to try something different. I think that's helpful.
Which is basically impossible when you're in the middle of it.
No, yeah, totally.
It's so hard. This conversation is depressing.
I'm sorry. When you guys were young, because there's a lot of young people here, like when did you first reach out for help? Who was the first person you told? And maybe what was it that made you realize, oh, I wasn't just in a bad mood or having a bad day, and oh, this might be a problem? Do you remember how old you expressed to someone this, or was it noticed by others? Tell us your story a little bit, as a kid or as a young adult. Hannah, do you remember?
Me? I blocked most of it out. God, my first experience with a clinician or like a therapist was court mandated, and I went to this therapist when I was like 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that, and it was miserable. It was just the worst experience for me personally, because I was so confused about this, her strategy, I guess, of trying to get me to start to talk about things was to offer me food. She'd be like, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about that, and then you can have this treat. But I guess that she didn't know I was hungry, and so it was I don't know, she didn't read the file. So I had a really negative impression about therapy for a long time, and also as someone who likes to believe I'm very smart, I spent a lot of times being like, I'm smarter than my therapist. I know what you're trying to get me to say. which was really self-defeating. So it wasn't effective until I was in a space in my mid-20s where I was ready to be, I was ready for it to help, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I knew there was something wrong pretty early on, but I think the first time I went to a therapist or got medication or anything was when I was 16. And it was, I mean, a pretty good experience. And then I sort of like bounced in and out of the world of, you know, proper mental health care for the next like 6 or 7 years, and then ended up pretty sick and in a kind of somewhat dangerous spot in my early 20s. And then since then I've been pretty consistently trying to deal with it and conscious of it, and you know, and also I didn't really understand that I had OCD when I was young, because I thought OCD had meant like washing your hands a lot, or like walking through doors a certain number of times, and that it had this like that very specific connotation that sort of has in popular culture. So understanding what actually was wrong with me was really important, and I didn't have that tool until a little bit later.
Just to clarify, so I know OCD too, it's the same thing. It's like as a kid you see jokes about her, you see, oh, she turns the light switch or taps. For you, what did OCD look like or feel like, just for people who kind of wonder?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the main thing is, well, everybody has these intrusive thoughts, you know, like you're standing on top of the Grand Canyon or whatever, and you look down and you think you could jump. That's actually not an unhealthy thought. And it's not unhealthy because the next thing you think is like, oh, I don't want to jump. That's so weird. Why did that thought occur to me? But in my mind, a lot of times those intrusive thoughts that are just passing thoughts are not passing thoughts. They become kind of the only thought that I can think, and it might be something that's harmful to me, or that's gross, or it might be something that's scary to me, like an infection or getting cancer or something, and I become unable. That thought sort of like takes over. There's a Edna St. Vincent Millay poem where I think she's talking about depression, but it's sort of a similar thing, and she says, 3 flakes, then 4 arrive, then many more. You know, like you can count the first 3 or 4 times the thought is happening to you, and then it's just a blizzard. And so that thought will take over, and you know, for hours or whatever, or however long it is, like it's kind of the only thought I can think. And then I kind of use compulsive behaviors to try to manage that, to try to think about something else, to try to get out of the spiral of that thought, and those can become unhealthy, or probably are pretty unhealthy in and of themselves a lot of times. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like for me.
So for me, it was a slightly different. So I'm in recovery from anorexia and bulimia. So for me, when I was at school, there was a lot of teachers noticing weight loss, that sort of thing. And I've also, I think that in my school environment, a lot of other people were struggling with the same things too. Very high pressure girls' school, you will just find those patterns. So I think there was a sense of having to realize that I was sick and accept that I was unwell, and then also it took years and years for me to manifest that into taking care of myself and to taking those steps. And like, you know, there's lots of steps that feel like steps backwards. And, you know, there's lots of, the word relapse is really, it's one I really struggle with. I used to always say when I was having a hard time again that I was relapsing, but that implies you're going backwards, which you're not. You're going forwards. You just are having a really hard day or month or year or whatever. So for me, it was strange to have another person look at me and say, no, like I see what's happening to you and you're unwell. Especially my family, very big stigma against mental illness in my family, even though there's a very big history of it. So it's one of those things that I'm so grateful to the teachers who took me aside and said, look, I'm really worried about you, because they helped me, even if it didn't really happen for years, they helped me get into my mind that like I am unwell and I deserve better and I should seek out treatment. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I was about 26 or 27 really before I sought out professional help. John, I don't think I've ever told you this, but when I was really depressed leading up to that, there would be parts where, like if I went to too dark a place, my wife would have this signal that I'm not allowed to, like we just need to break that pattern. She would say dingleberries.
From Catherine's?
Yeah, from Catherine's.
I'm glad I could give you that.
But I honestly didn't like myself enough to go to therapy for myself. I went because it was hurting my wife, and I didn't want to hurt her anymore. So that was, at first I went to a public clinic, which was a really bad experience. And then, I'm sure it's not always a bad experience, but I just didn't have a good one. And then I found a therapist who worked on a sliding scale, and that was when I really started to realize, I've been depressed since I was about 7 years old, pretty much constantly. So that was my experience.
I think it's interesting because, I take medication to manage my depression, and I also have ADHD, which, I think is delightful. But it's interesting because I spent 2 years in talk therapy with a therapist that now in reflection I realized, I started going when I was 25, consistently, that it wasn't actually the most effective form of therapy for me because we never established any goals. And, it just kind of felt like we were just chit-chatting, So I spent 2 years chit-chatting with this therapist. And then I brought up, I was like, I really don't feel much different from when we started, and I would like to explore medication. And so she was like, okay, and gave me a recommendation for a psychiatrist who didn't address depression at all, was just like, oh, it must be your ADHD, it must just be hyper-focusing on these negative thoughts, so here you go, here's some stimulant drugs, you'll be fine. And then a year after that, I was like, I don't know if it's just ADD, I don't know. And I started with a new therapist who immediately recommended I go get reevaluated, and it was just so apparent to this pair of people that I work with now what was going on for me, and it has been the best experience of my life in terms of managing my mental health.
It's so hard, though. It is so hard to get good mental health care in the United States, especially. It's really, really hard. It requires a tremendous amount of perseverance. It often requires the uncomfortable breaking up of a therapist or psychological professional. You get wildly, in some ways we just have not made as much progress in terms of mental health treatment as we have in terms of other kinds of health. And we've got some very blunt instruments to treat some very specific problems, and it can be really frustrating. I've been through that cycle of, taking 4 or 5 or 6 different SSRIs to try to figure out which one is going to be tolerable, and it's really hard. I do think that there is a lot of value in persevering through that process, even though it is difficult, because when you do get to the point where you're getting good care and the care that's right for you, it is kind of life-saving.
I think blunt instruments is the perfect term because we think of things in black and white and right and wrong, right? Something wrong with me, wrong with my brain, but that's not true. It's just this is the fingerprint of our minds, and everyone's work differently, and this is how my brain works, right? And so you have to have finer tuned instruments. You have to have a more refined approach. And unfortunately, a lot of that comes down to money, which really sucks. They have these tests they can do. The one's called GeneSight, where they can actually tell you which genes, which medications will be the most effective pairings for your genetics. That test costs money, but it saves you a journey of 4 or 5 or 6 medications, which also costs money. It's difficult.
John mentioned the importance of finding a good therapist, and I think that's interesting. So for those people listening right now, what's some tips? How do you know, I found a good therapist, or maybe if they go to therapy for the first time, what are some good questions to ask? Because I know people who get stuck with the wrong, I hate my therapist 3 years later, it's get out. So it's an uncomfortable uncoupling, but maybe in that first appointment or those first few appointments, it's almost like dating. It's try some out, and I think it's good to let them know this is a trial. So you go in there, it's you're not the therapist for the rest of my life, but you have any tips for knowing this is the right therapist versus it's time to go? Any tips for people? Anybody?
Yeah, I've ghosted so many therapists. Literally, I'm taking a month off and I'm just gonna see how I am, and then I just don't get back to them. I don't recommend that, but I
think that's fine. They're grown-ups.
Yeah.
They get it. It's I do that with the hairstylists all the time. I'm just like, I'm sorry, this is a bad haircut. Do you want to schedule another appointment? No, I'll call.
I'll get back to you. But I try and go into first therapy sessions with a lot of notes. I'm a preparer, I write bullet points. I'm like, here are the things I want to cover. Here are the things I'd like to address. Here are the things I'm not sure about. And any questions I have about the kind of therapy that they practice. Ask them to explain what they're interested in. Because there are times when with certain therapists, like they're particularly interested in a certain line of research. And sometimes it can feel like they're imposing that research upon your treatment. So that sometimes can feel a bit debating. So going in like just completely transparent, what it is that they're working on and they're open to and what you want from it. I think that Hannah's point about goal setting for yourself, even if it isn't something that you verbalize, but I think it's important to do so, is just great at helping you frame this experience as what you're going to get out of it, what you're going to get from it.
It's when you get to that point. I mean, I only know this because I've spent, I started when I was 25, and I've spent 5 years figuring out what kind of therapist I'm looking for, what kind of therapy I need. But if you're like, well, I don't even know what my goals are, like, that's okay. I think that the best, most basic strategy is set up like 3 appointments in the same week or 2 weeks if you can, which sucks because scheduling's so frustrating and hard. But setting up multiple appointments and going out and just getting the vibe, getting the sense, giving yourself the chance to be like, okay, this is a type of environment, this is a type of therapist. Some ask more questions, some ask less questions. Which do I feel more comfortable around? As kind of trying to establish that base level of self-knowledge in that way.
And also feel free to I've had a lot, I really don't like the therapy where they sit and then they don't say anything. That's like my least favorite type, but for some people it's really effective. So now when I go to a new therapist, I'm like, by the way, you have to ask me questions, because if you sit there, I will sit there in silence too, like a petulant child. Ask me questions.
I actually have the opposite thing with a therapist. Like when I have a new therapist, I say, I will talk over you, so please tell me to shut up sometime. And I also think that one of the difficulties of finding a therapist is that there's a certain level of productive discomfort in therapy. And it's hard to discern the difference between that productive discomfort of growth and this just isn't the right fit. And I don't have an easy answer for that, but I think that if you sit with it for a while, especially after a session, it becomes clear that what kind of discomfort you're dealing with.
Yeah, whether or not it's a discomfort that is something that you're exploring about yourself, or whether or not you just don't want to be in the same room as that person again.
Exactly.
One thing I learned about myself is that I need someone to be a little emotive, not like super emotive, not like, but I need them to be responding like a human being responds, because I'll be talking about some things. I've had experiences in therapy. I think I tried a handful in college, went to 1 each, but I had experiences in therapy where I was telling people about things in my life, and they're just like, and I'm like, that was horrible!
Right, you need some empathy.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, you gotta give me something.
Right.
Rose, you talked about the stigma of mental health and in your family being not. Have you guys mostly felt loved and supported in real life, or have there been some people who are like, oh, don't tell the internet? What's the and let's kind of transition the conversation to the internet. How has being on the internet affected your mental health? And there are lots of studies that there seems to be a lot of anxiety and depression based on Facebook feeds and things people they delete Facebook for months because they have so much anxiety based on social media. So how has that really changed, your experience with the internet, the good and the bad? How has that impacted your experience with mental illness? Anybody can answer that. The internet, has it played a role in your depression or anxiety?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, for me, I talked about this a little bit on the Women in Nerdfighteria panel. Part of what I'm trying to do now is that when I choose to be vulnerable online, I'm also being accountable in my own life about taking actions. So if I make a video about an experience with depression that week, then I'm also taking steps outside and offline, so it doesn't just become this avenue that I'm using that in exchange for other forms of treatment and just getting everything from that experience, because that puts too much pressure on that. And those are times when a negative comment and a response to that will crush me because I'm not taking these other avenues of care. So I think that's something that I am a little worried about sometimes, because I know that for some people it's really hard to talk to people in your real lives and to seek out help. So they use the internet kind of as a replacement for that. But I think that it is important to try in some small way even to hold yourself accountable in other parts of your life whenever you do share something that is intensely personal or helpful in that avenue online.
There's a dangerous level of self-diagnosing on the internet, like on Tumblr. I mean, I got into a K-hole on Tumblr once, and I was like, oh my god, I have BPD, I'm bipolar, guys. And I brought it up to my therapist, and she was like, and why do you think that? And I was like, well, I read this post, right? And so, just be careful with that. It is a wonderful resource, and information is a wonderful thing, but it's also a wonderful drug, and you have to make sure that you're actually talking with experts and talking to other human beings who get to see you outside of yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think I think in real life, a lot of times sometimes the stigma is extreme. I think especially for people who have mental illnesses that have been wrongly associated with violence, and that's very unfortunate. I think sometimes the stigma in real life is extremely subtle and it's complicated. For instance, if I'm stuck inside of a thought spiral, it's very difficult for me to pay attention to literally anything else, right? And that means that I'm not doing a good job of listening to the people in my life, not doing a good job of being around or present, and that's annoying, right? Like, that's difficult and it's annoying, and I think sometimes people don't want to hang out with you or I worry, I guess, that sometimes people don't want to hang out with me because they feel like that's gonna be a bummer. That's not gonna be a fun night out. And so I think in terms of my online life, I've felt very supported in general. I think the great risk in online discourse is, just like they've said, it can't be a full replacement. It can't be a full replacement for your real life, and it can't be I know for a lot of people it's an important resource in treatment strategies, but I do think that there is value to real life seeking the right kind of help and resources in your actual physical life.
Yeah, for me, the internet is most useful with my mental health it's least useful when I'm online passively and just kind of consuming content passively, whether that's news or the Twitter feed or Facebook feed, but it's most useful when I can use it to get outside of myself in the most productive way possible. Like, if you've ever been on the How to Adult Tumblr when I was running it, and there's this spree of 15 asks answered in a row, I was having a really bad day and I wanted to help people because that makes me feel better.
Right.
So
that's a great point. I mean, there's something to the social connectivity of the internet that's always been sort of great for me, because it does ask me to point myself outward, which is a really important thing.
Huge. I recently started live streaming more instead of, I have a really bad habit of sitting alone in my house and just staring and just sitting, and it's something that I'm really actively trying to work on, just because it's kind of my default state that just stems from being a kid who just spent a lot of time alone. So I would just be it's just waiting, this feeling of constantly waiting, and it really bumps me out. And so I've started just straight up live streaming and doing an activity, being cool, I'm gonna do a puzzle, here we go. And it really helps because I get to see people, somebody's hi from Peru, and it's oh yeah, Peru exists. And it's really effective. It really it's helped me out so much. Because there's all these habits and all these patterns that we are taught as children and as young adults, and that it can be really debilitating. I came from a family that didn't believe in doctors or mental health that was anything that was real, and it was deeply, deeply, deeply stigmatized and very frightening, honestly, to explore. And in that way, as you become more open in discussing it, it's almost like you're setting yourself up for that commentary, but there's so much support on the other side. That's what I really love about the internet, is that it is one of the most inclusive spaces to talk openly about your mental health, to talk openly about what you're struggling with, what your illnesses, quote unquote, are. I like to think of them as like conditions or the way your brain is wired. And it's like illness is such a, I think it's the wrong word, frankly.
Well, I mean, unless you can like, I agree. I think like if there was a word for chronic illness, if there was a word that like separated the flu from diabetes, you know, like which are very different experiences, you know, like wait 3 days.
Yeah, it's also an implication of like fighting. It's like if you have the flu, you're fighting.
Yeah, there's the battle element, which is very problematic. I think like that's a super problematic metaphor in a lot of ways, because you're not really, what exactly are you at war with? Like in my case, I'm at war with my thoughts. Well, whose thoughts are the other thoughts? Like who's doing the warring? Is that also me? Are there two me's? Is one of them a demon? Like it's just like it's one of those things where the more you think about it, and I think about it a lot, the worse it gets, you know. So I find the battle metaphor totally unhelpful because then I'm like, oh great, civil war.
I think of it as like walking a lot. It's like you're walking alongside something. You're not fighting your demon. You're walking with your demon because your demon's a part of you.
That's lovely. That's much better.
Yeah.
Well, you have this beautiful bit in buffering.
Oh God.
No, there's you include, I think, in the book this picture of, is it like Red Riding Hood and a fox?
It's Red Riding Hood.
And the wolf, obviously, because there's no fox in Red Riding Hood. Yeah, and it's just such a beautiful depiction of that, and I really, really love that, and that really stuck with me. So bufferingbook.com.
Do you guys remember, it's almost like coming out, like telling someone I'm gay. It's like making a video and telling someone I've got depression. Do you guys remember the first time you kind of told your audience that you were, you know, going through something? Do you remember what that video was and like what was the response you got and how did you feel after? Anybody want to share their story of that?
On How to Adult, like the first time I exposed the fact that I have a mental illness to a significant audience, it was on How to Adult. I made a video called What If Depression Followed You Online, which like imagined depression talking to you through social media. Hannah, you reblogged it, which was amazing. Thank you very much. I was really nervous about that. I remember that it was ready to go at 8 a.m. and I couldn't bring myself to publish it until 3 p.m. that day. But the outpouring of support was amazing, and the conversation that happened in the comments was amazing. I've got like the things that meant most to me about doing How to Adult were the people who said, I went to therapy because of that video, or I tried to find a new therapist because of that video. So that was my first experience.
John, Rosianna.
I've talked about depression a lot, and I don't remember the very first video, but it's kind of been consistent. But I've always been really, I guess, afraid or wary to sit and talk about eating disorders because, firstly, the questions that come from it is kind of an extent of like having to prove it.
It's like super triggering.
It's very, yeah, and that's something that I just can't do. But also for me, the thing that's terrifying for me is that part of, and even now I'm like wary to talk about, but part of what enabled me to get more sick was that I would go to people's resources they put out to help people recover and find ways of making myself more ill. So the thing with eating disorders is that it's so difficult to find ways to talk about that. I don't want to hurt anyone, and I don't want anyone to hurt themselves, and that's terrifying to me. So that's always been my struggle, but I recently started this series called Back Burner, where I cook for a month from the same book, and that's been a really helpful way into it, because it's something that is nourishing and talks about food in a different way, but it stays away from talking about those behaviors in any kind of, I don't know, backwards didactic form. Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, so I talked for a long time about how I have like anxiety problems or how I've had, episodes of major depression in the past. Usually sort of vaguely. I mean, to be honest, I identify with a little bit of what Rosianna said. Although I think for me, like the reason I've struggled to talk about it directly is a fear, like I guess two fears: a fear, one, that it will happen, or a fear, two, that it will happened to someone else and talking about that. Like it's very hard for me to talk about it directly because it is scary, and like when it happens, it's very unpleasant, and like I often can't get out of it for hours, you know, and like that's just, well, anyone who's ever been forced to have the same thought over and over again for hours will know that it is exhausting. And like it is just everything else. I mean, everything else aside, like it's just not fun. Like, you know, like it's just not how I want to spend a Sunday. So I go to pretty extreme lengths to try. I mean, that's where a lot of the compulsive behaviors come from. I think is that you go to these extreme lengths to try to not have to have whatever this thought that you don't want to have is. And so I didn't really start talking about it directly until like a couple years ago. Every year my brother and I do this like 2-week thing where we make videos every weekday and we try to sell a bunch of Pizza John shirts. And it's really fun. I was in a not this most recent pizza, this previous Pizza Fest, I was in a very bad shape, like in the worst place I'd been in many, many years, and it was really bad, and I just ended up kind of having to make a video about it because I had to make a video that day about something, and I couldn't think about anything else, and it was definitely scary. I mean, I felt sort of, you know, felt exposed, and but I also felt very well supported. I mean, we have, you know, Hank and I are off the charts lucky in terms of the support that we get from our audience, and the support I think that people in the audience feel even with each other. You know, like Vlogbrothers is one of the very few channels, although I think actually everybody here runs channels like this, but most channels on YouTube get worse when you scroll down. And I think we're very lucky that Vlogbrothers gets better when you scroll down, and so I think I just had a lot of support, which was very nice and very helpful.
It's huge. It's huge to have. You know, I think that I hope that you guys appreciate yourselves as much as we appreciate you. I feel like my online community has been hugely enabling for wellness for me, and that has been so significant because it's shown me better ways to accept myself and take care of myself, and that comes from having good, positive examples and role models of compassion and openness, which effectively for me have been you guys. So thank you. The first time I talked about any sort of like clinically diagnosable issue was, I think I did a video called Hocus Focus, and it was about having ADHD because I was so excited about it, and there's so many things to talk about. Great book, by the way, for anybody who is interested, Driven to Distraction. It's really good, read it. Yes, shout out.
The author's here.
The author. But recently, you know, I've been, you know, I always try and be consistent with my videos, and it's really hard for me because I go through depressive episodes, you know, throughout my life, and it's really hard for me to maintain a consistent video basis if I haven't shot a ton of videos while I'm having a good week. So recently, through is that a train?
That's what
Or is
depression
that
feels like.
is that a train, or is it the end?
Catastrophizing.
Yeah. I was literally raised in a religion that believed the apocalypse was coming and would be signaled by a horn. Okay.
So every time you're at a concert and like the trumpet comes out, you're like, uh-oh.
Oh god. Which horn?
It's happening.
Literally, yes. No, but I've been lucky to be, I'm in like a really, really supportive relationship and a really supportive place in my life. And so I made a video about a depression last week.
It's so good. You've seen it. Yeah, it's so good.
Thank you, God. But it's like, I've always had that video in me. I just never felt like it was a good idea or safe or worthy of posting. Like, that video is like probably the most default state of feeling for me, and I just never wanted to post it because I was just kind of worried that people would be like, you know, because I've had so many reactions to my behaviors in my life with people where they're like, why are you being like this? And so that really kept me from wanting to talk about it in that way or to show it, to illustrate it. And blessedly, I'm surrounded by a lot of really good positive support right now, and I don't feel ashamed. and it let me kind of show you guys another part of myself.
And it's like you need to remember that, because every time you are hesitant or feeling maybe I shouldn't, just remember, oh, I made that video and everybody found it beautiful and helpful, so yay, just keep that in your brain. Just write a little post-it, know what I'm about to share is beautiful and helpful and I will be loved and supported. Everybody make that post-it.
People, the way we respond to each other is so important. You know, there's so much shame affiliated with the way we feel, you know? And so it's like every conversation you have with somebody, you know, just try and create a space where you're listening to them and you're allowing them the safety to express.
Yeah, you know, I mean, on that front, like honestly, the thing that is most helpful to me, the thing that has really like carried me through the last 10 years is that my spouse is really good at being supportive, and I know like it is objectively annoying to have somebody like in your house who like does not look up when you ask them a question. Like it is objectively frustrating. And when I look to her for reassurance, which I do a lot, she's very good at being reassuring. She's very good at saying like, this is probably an incidence of catastrophization. And she's very good at being patient with those parts that are really difficult, that are truly difficult, where I'm not, you know, the person or the partner that I want to be. And having that support in your life is really, I know that I'm lucky and that most people don't have it a lot of the time, but just because you don't have it now doesn't mean that you never will, and I think it's really important to try to remember that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, I mean, you were talking about the stigma of it. Something that's been amazing to me to see has been all of the people who said, well, not all of the people, but many of the people who said those things originally and kind of encouraged that culture, at least in my immediate circles, now coming around and addressing the problems in their lives. And sometimes it's because they've seen my video and they kind of understand the language for it. Sometimes it's because just everything is changing. I know that, you know, mental health care across the world is not good enough. Like 100% not good enough, but things are changing, things are getting better on that front. I very strongly believe that, and seeing people come around to it is also going to lead to more people who are able to provide that kind of support and know the kind of support that they could be offering, that sort of thing. And it's hard to think of yourself as someone who needs support. Right. It's hard to think of yourself as needing that. But you just have to be generous to yourself in that respect as well. You know, you have to. It comes down to saying to yourself, "I'm worthy of being loved," which is an extremely difficult thing to come to mind to, and you might not have that thought consistently for the rest of your life. But if you have it for like 30 seconds in one day, then that is a victory.
Yeah.
It's also true. I mean, it's really important to like internalize that. I know most of us can't do it most of the time, but like that is actually and deeply true, that you are worthy of being loved, that you are worthy of love. Like that is maybe like, I don't know that we're worthy of much, but I'm positive. Like I'm deeply convinced of that. And so it's not like something you tell yourself to try to like, you know, make it through this crap veil of tears. Like it's true.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that things are getting better, Rosie, because I think about a lot, the sooner that we can take care of each other in this space, I think that will be the time that we can then go and take care of people who are literally debilitated from their mental illness. You know, like my mom suffers from psychosis. She doesn't function in the same world that we do, and there's so many people who, you know, my family has experienced homelessness, etc., and there's so many people on the streets who are non-violent people who are literally just very ill and have no help, and we would never look at someone who has cancer and put them outside. But that is actively what our society has decided to do. So the sooner we can take care of each other in this space, which I think is the step we're working on culturally right now, I do believe that we will get to the space where we're no longer afraid to take care of them.
No, and I mean, you've all just hit on this, and it's so true. We see commercials, we see TV shows, we're so interested in physical health and getting well, but then it's like, if your brain's not working properly, you're not going to go for a run to lose weight to be well. It all starts with the brain.
Yeah.
And I love that you guys share your stories, but I mean, and John, I remember seeing that video, and I mean, I'd known you for years before, but I felt like I was seeing you for the first time. I'm like, oh, I know this guy, I know his content, and then it was like, oh, and then kind of more made sense. I'm like, oh, no, I get John more, I understand you more. I mean, and so, I mean, thank you guys for sharing that in your videos. What do you guys think, though, when you see YouTubers, and again, there's a difference between making a helpful video about depression, and then sometimes you see someone, like a YouTuber, and I think we were talking about this the other night, Rosie, we're off the record kind of, and you see someone and they seem like unhinged and you're nervous and you're like, oh God. Like, and so is there a sense sometimes when we see those videos of, oh, we need to help, or oh, we need to leave a comment, or we need to DM, or do you think they're just trying to be entertaining? Like, do you ever see videos and you think, oh, this is kind of icky, and they're having like I don't know, do you know what I'm talking about? The oversharing? For not sake of helpfulness.
Are you talking about what you were saying yesterday about when you were going through divorce?
Well, that's different. That was like a manic episode on camera with alcohol, but I don't even know. People reached out, but they loved the videos. That was also weird. People were like, you're so funny. I'm like, I'm having an episode, but thanks for caring. Your videos have never been better. I'm unhinged. No, but I mean, when does it feel icky and when does it feel helpful? Like, did you ever make a video and thought, oh, that was just self-indulgent for me, or that was for the greater good of like my audience? Did you ever think that?
My fear has always been the self-indulgent aspect, but that's because I feel guilty all the time, every day.
But you're working on it.
I'm working on it. Yeah. It's a journey. So when I made Depression in Under 2 Minutes, which is the name of the video, it was scary because I was like, oh my God, am I doing that thing I'm afraid of doing? But I honestly don't watch a lot of mental health content, and so when somebody posts something about that, I am usually watching it on a channel, of somebody whose other content I enjoy, and then there's this moment where they've revealed this other aspect of themselves. So I don't know about seeing something and being like, oh, is this too much? Because I don't Google depression videos, because I think it might make me depressed.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be super conscious of I'm not a psychological professional and no good at diagnosing people, so I try to be conscious of that. And if I'm concerned about, I mean, I also, the slice of somebody you see on YouTube is not, as I'm sure you're all aware.
You said that in the video too about the jump cut, how you almost feel like I'm jump cutting, but you're not seeing what's really going on.
Right. I mean, the magic of the jump cut is that, it allows me to hopefully be entertaining for 4 minutes in a row.
And you are.
We've learned anything from the last 48 minutes is like not a sustainable enterprise. Yeah, I think. So I try to remember that I'm only seeing a tiny part of someone, and so if I have a concern about somebody I know personally, like I'll reach out personally, but I'll also, in that reaching out, I'll say, listen, I hope you're well, and if you're not, I'd love to talk, but I don't try to make too many judgments from somebody's YouTube life, because, it ain't the whole story.
What's changed?
No, I feel the same way. I mean, I always try to, I always feel like a very ugly person when I'm expressing or feeling depression, and so I always try to come with an overabundance of if anything, an overabundance of empathy and compassion for what people are expressing, even if it comes off as self-indulgence or something. I try not to go to that place, and if I do know them, I will reach out.
I think that's probably the most appropriate thing to do, because it's like, hey, I've noticed for the last 6 months you've only made this type of video, again, going back to Rosie, what we were saying about vulnerability, but accountability. So it's like, if I'm gonna make I'm comfortable making this video about depression because of all the things I'm doing in my real human life and all the other tools and steps I'm taking. And now I'm sharing a piece of this with you, and this is not the only thing I'm doing to try and help myself cope at this moment in time.
Have you ever taken a sabbatical from YouTube for a month or two? Did you ever need time off? You simply couldn't be on camera, or you wanted to give yourself a break? Was there ever a time where you needed the time off?
Heck yeah. Yeah, big time. There were times when How to Adult, where we had, I think, 5 weeks of guest hosts, exactly for that reason, even though I didn't kind of acknowledge it. Although the depression video did come out right after we had 5 guest hosts in a row. Because I try to, and it's not something I'm great at, but I try to, when I'm dealing with depression, make content that is in conjunction with getting some kind of help, but also after I've kind of resolved some of what I've been going through. Because I wanted to have value beyond just my catharsis that I'm experiencing and expressing it. But yeah, I've definitely had to take breaks. And I find that if I get the little warning signs that things are getting into the red line, I have to do it. It's a self-preservation, it's a self-care and self-love thing to back up a little bit, and maybe it's not right, maybe not make videos for a little while.
Yeah, and it's good to have, as content creators, we will only be able to continue to create content if we take care of ourselves. As people, you can only love somebody if you love yourself, right? So I haven't shot a My Drunk Kitchen in 2 months. I'm known for this show, My Drunk Kitchen, and it's a great show and I love it and I love it. And the last one I did was in Christmas. And for me, My Drunk Kitchen is an expression of joy, and it's an expression, it's a really energetic place. And I've been using that energy in different directions in my life right now. And it's not something I can just force myself to do because I have too close a relationship with it. So yeah, I think that's okay, because I've forced myself to do videos, and every time people are like, Hannah seems tired. And I'm like, yo, I am.
Last couple years, I love when you talked about doing a puzzle or doing something. Do you have any coping skills or that work for you? That again, they might not work for everybody, but do you have any go-to? This has been good for me. Anybody?
Exercising to the point of exhaustion.
Yeah.
Just the most. It's almost impossible to do when you're sick, so it's not that helpful of a treatment strategy a lot of times, because when you most need it is when it is least available to you. But I have found it to be game-changing.
That to me can sometimes be dangerous. So it's a double-sided thing.
Right.
But for me, it's cooking, because that's kind of connected me with food in an exciting way. But I do think that finding exercise that doesn't rely on you looking at figures, so exercise that involves getting on your bike and going on a bike trail. That's been things that have sometimes worked for me better. Yeah.
Walking is the number one thing for me. It's so hard to do because I love taking walks. I like walking around. It's one of my favorite things to do. But when I've been on the couch for too long, taking a walk is the most available strategy for me, and it really helps me look at all the other stories that are playing out around me. There's something about taking a walk for 30 minutes that will, no matter what, help me feel maybe better enough to take a shower.
Yeah. For me, it's, John will hate that I say this, but it's meditation. That helps.
Boo.
Meditation.
You guys, we have 7 minutes left. I'm going to lead a guided meditation for 7 minutes.
All right. No, meditation is great. I am totally in favor of it. It is proven to work. So I am just an outlier.
It's great. Yoga with Adrian. That's been amazing. So there's this great YouTuber, Adrian Mishler. She has these yoga courses on her YouTube channel for free. She does these 30-day courses. I've been doing them recently, and they've been amazing. Videos ranging from 20 to 30 minutes, and you take the time in your day to do it, and you feel a little bit stronger. But you also, I really struggle with meditation. So for me, that's a way of meditating and getting into that headspace.
All right, Mike, make the meditation case.
It allows you to take. Okay, I still have the thoughts. I still have the depressive thoughts. They're still there. But it's I'm watching the storm outside a window rather than being in the storm itself. That's kind of what it feels like. The other thing that I think is less controversial is I play with my puppy because he's awesome.
For a great meditation app is Headspace.
I love it. Yeah.
That's what I use, yeah.
Headspace is great. It's 10 minutes. Literally, if you download the app, if you download Headspace, there's something called the 10-day challenge, and it's about whether or not you can meditate for 10 minutes a day for 10 days. It took me 1 year to do all 10 days. In 2015, I was like, okay. And it took me 1 year to complete all 10 days. But after having gone through these foundational elements, I find myself able to just kind of sink into those spaces more readily. It's been a really wonderful gift to give to yourself.
And the guy's just like, oh, watch the clouds go by. You're having a thought. That's okay. Watch the thought go by.
He's British. He's lovely.
And I'm listening to him. I also use headspace. And I'm listening to him, and I'm like, what superpower do you have, dude?
I think it's because you didn't do. You gotta breathe more.
Maybe.
You have to
Maybe I'm not breathing enough. I feel like I'm counting my breaths. And then he's just like, don't get in the car with that thought. And I'm like, but that car looks so good.
And then Hannah's like, and I'm going to drive the car off the Grand Canyon.
I'm going to be in that car. I'm in the car. I'm not going to get out of this car for like 5 hours.
Well, we just have 5 minutes left, and you guys are so inspirational, and I appreciate you so much. Just, go down the line, starting with Mike, and come this way if you don't mind. Just, what do you want everybody to know? Like, what's your takeaway? What's your message? What can we learn from today? Anybody who's thinking about mental health, as we always are, and what do you want people to know today that we haven't really talked about? Just go down the line in words of anything.
Well, the depression is kind of a bazooka that shoots blanks. Like, it looks really scary, but it's a liar. Depression is fundamentally a liar. Yes, I have problems in my life, but that doesn't mean they're going to be forever. It doesn't mean that, having one problem indicates that everything about me is a problem. And it's even though I'm in a depressive episode, there are still moments of joy. There's a lot of joy to be had even with mental illness, and it comes and it goes. And you just have to do the work to ensure that it's there, that joy is there more than it's not. That's kind of been my personal journey.
Thank you, Rosie.
I haven't really talked that specifically about food, but I would say that food is not something to be afraid of, and I think we're taught in our culture to be afraid of it or hate it or see it in terms of in very extreme ways. I think that there are lots of exciting ways to, as cheesy as it sounds, get closer to your food. There's this alienation that happens in the way we consume things these days, that you don't often see where your food comes from. You don't often meet the people who are making it, and sometimes that's just not physically possible. But there are so many ways that you can get closer to it and kind of not see it as the adversary. And I'd encourage you to, even if you're not struggling with an eating disorder, just think about the way food and the horrible word diet come into your life, and whether there are ways that you can be a little kinder to yourself and to the food, because I think that nourishment is what's going to really carry you in many ways through some of the darkest periods of your life, and the kindnesses that you can do to yourself, even if it is just eating a pack of hummus or something. That's you're nourishing yourself, you're taking care of yourself, and that's because you're valuable and you're worth it.
When I was a teenager, I thought that I really wanted to be a writer, and I thought that to be a good writer, you needed to be an alcoholic, and that you needed to be crazy. And all the writers that I really looked up to were alcoholics, and a lot of them were depressive, and there is a lot of stigmatization of mental illness, very serious, and I don't want to minimize it. There's also, at times, romanticizing of mental illness, this idea that it gives you secret superpowers, that, Carrie Matheson can figure out who the terrorist is in Homeland because she goes off her meds, and her bipolar brilliance allows her to make connections that regular brains can't make, and only depressed people can write great novels, and especially if they're Russian, and all that stuff. And there is of course an association between mental health problems and creativity, and it's real. But I guess I want to say, some of the best writers I know are also some of the sanest people I know, and that it is not a requirement. And in fact, I would say that even though I've lived with this thing for a long time, or these things, if you think about them plural, the work that I've done that I'm the most proud of is work that I've done when I'm well, and when I'm taking treatment seriously, and when I'm lucky enough that it's working. I guess I would say don't buy into